Okay, so Cryton is now playing. So Cryton, we're white again here, and we will go e4. Why are we always white? What's going on? So e4 c6. So he plays the dreaded Caro-Kann, one of the better openings in chess. And yeah, I'm going to do something a little bit unusual here. I'm going to play the so-called Accelerated Panov. I don't really believe that this is such a great way to fight for an advantage as white. But it's a little bit annoying at times. So because this is one of the key ideas, you play queen a4 and then you force bishop to d7 or knight to d7. And then you drop the queen back. And the idea behind first giving the check before dropping the queen back is that if the bishop was still here, first of all, the pawn would be defended. But even more importantly, queen takes d5 ideas would be in the air, or knight takes d5, because the pawn on d5 would be defended, would be attacked a second time. So here, after queen b3, we don't have that concern. And so it's a nice idea to play against club level players because they usually aren't going to know the theory, and white's strategy is very primitive and very shameless, which is I'm going to try and hang on to the pawn, and I kind of know how to do that. And if you're not careful, you can very, very quickly find yourself in a lost position. So now I think e6 is just a mistake, because now I'm picking up a second pawn on b7, and then the rook on a8 is also hanging. So I'm not sure, but unless he has some ideas revolving around trapping my queen, which definitely are a concern, then he has to be very careful. One of the things to note always when you're thinking in tactical terms, one thing that is very important to note is, do I have any pieces undefended? So right now, for example, I notice my bishop on c1 is undefended. Of course, my queen is also undefended, but the queen is usually less of a concern. She's such a strong piece that it's hard to attack the queen unless you attack it with a knight. It's hard to attack with the queen without the queen attacking you back, right? But otherwise, in certain positions. But with other pieces, you have to be very careful. So this bishop on c1 is a danger. And that actually means that black immediately can solve the problem of the lost rook by leveraging the fact that my bishop is undefended. So he could play the move queen c8 here. And then if I take here and take here, this would be complete lunacy for me to do. I mean, I could calculate it. If it was in a real game, I would look into it. King e2, you never know. But in general, when you're playing a blitz game and you're playing intuitively, you don't want to be capturing. So already, I think my opponent gives up a piece and misses a great opportunity to avoid a material loss by leveraging the problems in my position. One of the common things that club level players do is they're a bit and of course everybody does this to some extent, but they can be sometimes either too focused on their position, like the way their pieces are arranged and the problems in their position, or too focused in the other way around, and they're looking too much at their opponent's piece configuration. Whereas, of course, the higher level players, those guys are masters at just covering both perspectives, right? So they're always looking at what are the good things about my position, the bad things about my opponent, about my position, and what are the good and the bad about my opponent's position. Can I correct the bad? Can I leverage the good? Can I punish the problems in his position? Can I leverage the bad in his position to fix the bad in my position? Things like that. Another idea, for example, would have been to play knight takes d5, queen takes a8, and then go queen c7, which builds on this same concept. And the point there is that the bishop is hit, and at the same time you threaten ideas like bishop c6, trapping the queen. So there were some interesting ideas that were arising based off of the fact that this bishop was undefended. And in fact, I'm seeing in the chat that Jen's Chess is actually saying was knight d5, queen queen a8 and queen c7 with the idea of bishop c6 possible. So we can take a look at that afterwards, but at first sight it definitely looks quite interesting. So here one of the things I'm noticing is the c2 square is a little bit vulnerable, and for example if I therefore continue my development with knight c3, knight b4 is very annoying because my queen is hit and I don't have the a4 square or the d3 square, because the d3 square will be covered by his knight, the a4 square by his bishop. So that's not something that I want. And my question is, do I have time to play the move a3 and just cover against his threats? Because there are no open lines against my king, I think I can actually afford to just take this square on b4 and prevent this activity. Another approach that I might have taken is the move bishop to b5, and then if knight b4 I could go queen a4, but the problem there is the move knight d3 check, and then I cannot take that because my queen will be on a4. And if I can picture that position, so my bishop is here, my queen is here, his knight will be here on d3. The problem there is that my bishop is hanging and my pawn on f2 will hang. So if I go to the left, he'll take here. If I go to the right, he'll take here. So again, always you have to be very careful and very alert. No matter if you're up a piece or something like that, one of the biggest mistakes made at all levels is just to relax too soon. But what you notice is that the higher level players, they don't relax until they know that short of some acute medical problem, right? They're not going to lose the game. So I'm going queen to e2. It's a little bit of a strange square, and in hindsight, I probably would have preferred to put it on a5, where it would pin, and if he ever moves the knight, I can get the queens off the board. But on the other hand, I'm not too concerned about blocking in my bishop, because my intention is to go g3 and bishop to g2, and this long diagonal here looks quite nice. Also, of course, the room for error for white at the moment of a piece is the margin for error is very high. So my opponent is thinking, and he goes rook b8, which makes a lot of sense. Just basically placing the rook on the semi-open file. I'll go g3. I'll put the bishop on g2. One thing I have to be careful of, if you notice, most of my pawns, in fact all of my pawns, are on dark squares, which means I have a lot of weaknesses on the light squares, which tells me that this plan that I embarked on, g3, bishop g2, maybe it's not so precise, because if he is able to get some pieces into any of these squares, it could be a little bit annoying. So rook e8, I'm not a big fan of this move. I think he should do something to try and get pieces in. The one thing that's going very well for me is that this knight is very passively posted, and I do have it more or less under control. So I'm going to go bishop g2. If black gives me enough time here, I'll put the pawn on d4, I'll castle, maybe I'll throw a knight onto e5. That would be very nice, because if I could pick up this bishop, in fact, perhaps well, I'm going to play d4 now just to prevent any e5 ideas, because one of the plans that he could have is e5 and then knight e6 and then knight c5 or knight d4, and again try and get at me on these squares. He goes knight d5, but the thing about it is that he doesn't actually have any further jumps here that scare me. This knight trade is not an issue, so I'm going to castle. One thing to notice is if these knights were off the board as is, he would have to move bishop b5, winning an exchange. But if he takes, and then goes bishop b5, importantly, my pawn will now be on c3, and I'll have c4, so defending against the exchange. Last stream we were sponsored by Vittel Water. Today it's Viva Water. So we just keep securing more and more lucrative water sponsorship deals stream by stream. So he does go for this, but after c4 I think I'm okay. He does have the move bishop takes d4 here, which is a move that kind of spices things up a bit. Hits my rook, ignores his bishop. Seems a bit too much to do, but maybe actually it worked. After bishop takes d4, I thought rook d1, but then he could go bishop takes c4, and if I go queen takes, he goes bishop takes f2, check, king takes, and then takes here. And he's gotten a rook and 2 pawns for his 2 bishops. It should be okay for me. But on the other hand, my development is still poor, and I think it changes the character of the position. So definitely, I think something like that would have been quite strong. But I'm actually just being foolish here. I just realized if bishop takes d4, I can actually just take here. Oh, no, I cannot. Sorry, excuse me. I had forgotten what I had initially seen. No, but I can... what can I do? No, the problem is if I take everything here, then he's hitting my rook and he's hitting my pawn. So if I go bishop e3, then he just takes here, and he's picked up 2 pawns. So after bishop takes d4, another option that I have is just bishop g5 here. Then my threat is to take the bishop. He goes f6 in that position. Then I go rook a d1, hitting his bishop. And then he probably takes this guy, but I then take this guy, or I play rook takes first, hitting his queen. If he goes bishop here, I double up, and then I come in with knight e5 in the end, which is tough visualization there, but I think I got it right. I might show it after the game if people like to see it, but I think bishop takes d4 doesn't work. One of the things that, let's say, higher level players are doing is usually they when they see something like this, they intuitively, because they have a lot of experience with the game, they intuitively know, is this going to be good? Is this going to be bad? And more often than not, they're right. And then afterwards, they try and find the concrete stuff. Whereas less experienced players, what they're doing is they're sort of calculating more blindly. So yeah, it's something to keep in mind. I'm just going to defend my center here, bishop to e3, and continue my development. And I'm probably going to go rook here. At some point, I'll drive the knight to a natural central square, and yeah, just sort of play it move by move. Queen c7 looks like it could potentially fall into some bishop f4 ideas here. But of course, at the same time, this guy is hanging, and after takes, if I take this rook, this rook falls. So that does not look so good. The move rook f to c1 makes a lot of sense to me. A typical question that people, you struggle with across lots of different openings is where exactly should the rooks go? Should they go here and here? Should they go here and here? Should they go here and here? In this case, I'm putting the rook on c1 just because I step out of these problems. And I'm not so concerned about d4 because I don't really want to push d5. I wouldn't want to do that and sort of crack open the position in his favor. That would favor all of his pieces, if you see. So I'm not looking to put the rook here in order to advance the pawn for now. And then at the same time, I'm not looking to put the rook here in order to defend the pawn because I think my pawn is quite safe. At the moment, it's defended by 2 minor pieces, and he only has 1 minor piece that hits the dark squares, meaning that the only way he can win that pawn is by, ganging up on it and then being willing to sacrifice in exchange, or alternatively, he can go bishop b7, take my knight, and then down the line grab this pawn, but that's a little bit of a way away. So he goes rook here, and now my question is, do I have bishop f4, which I think now I definitely do. And there's a little tactical point here. If he goes bishop takes c4, I can actually just take everything here. And in the end, the rook on b8 is hanging there because of the bishop being on f4. So after this game, I'll just catch up a little bit with the chat. We do upload these videos to YouTube. So in general, I'm trying not to interact a little bit too much with the chat and focus instead on the games so that YouTube viewers, I'm guessing it's just a wild guess, but I'm guessing they don't really want, to catch our little chit chat, our idle chit chat, with Twitch, Chess Fan 123, asking me, you know, how's my day been, and me saying, yeah, my day's been good, right? I mean, we might enjoy that, but I doubt the YouTube snobs want that. In fact, probably they're gonna have to edit out what I just said, right? Calling them YouTube snobs for no reason. But anyway, that's why you gotta keep your mouth shut. So going back to the game, so Black does resign here. Yeah, position is very bad, but he lost the piece. He needed to do something. Let's take a look at just that one idea here. After Queen A4, usually it's considered Knight BD7 is much better. Bishop D7 can be played, but it's a little bit more risky if you don't know what you're doing. For example, you can do things like Knight A6 here. And the point is, if Queen takes B7, you go Rook C8, again, leveraging that bishop. And if Knight C3, you go Knight C5. And now if Queen takes A7, you play E5. And the engines will tell you that actually the development lead counts for too much, and the weakness is in the light squares. And so White cannot play like this. But if you're a club level player, you're not thinking in those terms, understandably so, because you haven't studied this stuff for a long time like the top guys have. And so it's much better to just go Knight BD7. It's what I recommend in my own Caro-Kann series. And just play G6, Bishop G7, Castle. And at some point or another, the gist of it is that you can, if White is not careful, pick up this pawn. And sometimes you can't pick up the pawn and you have to do some other funky stuff. Like sometimes you even have ideas like Knight here, here, and here. And you play the position down a pawn for a while. But you know, there are weak squares in the White position. The structure is not so good, and overall, as you can see from the engine evaluation and from the tournament results, Black is doing, you know, as you can see, Black is absolutely scoring respectable percentages in tournament practice. After Bishop D7, Queen B3, Black here played this move E6, and this was a mistake. And after Queen takes B7, here what we were saying is, you know, Queen C8 would at least avoid the loss of the rook, as you can see here, playing like this as the engine rightly shows. It's too much. You know, it's just an exchange at the end of the day, and you're putting your king here on E2, and all your pieces and your development is forever dead. So not the way to go. But of course, after Queen takes, Bishop takes, and Pawn takes, White would be up 2 pawns, and that's a very healthy 2 pawns all of a sudden. And so the other possibility was to play Knight takes D5. This was what was mentioned by Jens Chess, and Queen here and Queen C7 idea. And the point is that after Knight C3, he wanted Bishop to C6. Now, of course, there seems to be some problems with this because Black himself has some issues. I think that after Knight C3, Bishop here, probably Bishop to B5 solves those problems for Black, right? So you can see that for White, you can see that White would actually be losing. So Jens had a great idea, if not for something very concrete. Some calculation required there, but also some thematic points here with this open diagonal. So Bishop B5 saves the day, because now if Bishop takes B5, Knight takes B5, the Bishop is defended, so there's no issues there. And if Knight takes C3 here, we just play an intermezzo move with Bishop takes C6, and it's a disaster for Black. So that doesn't work. What might work is what the engine is showing here, this move Queen B6. Because then at least the Bishop B5 ideas are not working, or at least are not working so well. White has to go Knight C3, and the point is that after Bishop to C6, White still has the idea Bishop B5. He is up a full rook here, but it's less convincing because after Bishop takes B5, I guess if you play like this, you've given up a piece, you're still up an exchange, but the drawback there is that your king is bang in the middle of the board. Black has the bishop pair. Your structure is not very good. Black's development is very fast. It's coming very fast. Black has potentially some very serious threats. Overall, the situation does not look attractive. Much better to take this guy than to take that guy. And after Queen takes B5, the problem is your queen is a little bit stuck. You don't really want to be taking this guy because after Knight F4, you see what I was saying about the light squares. They're really an issue in this position, and you're getting crushed. So White would have to play very precisely with stuff like A4, and only after kicking the queen away, something like this. And then here, if you castle, you're already in trouble because your queen is stuck. So you would need to find a move like a5. And then here, amazingly, only move a6 in order to finally rescue your queen. This is advanced level stuff. And I can tell you that, you know, if I was in a classical game and I was playing a competent opponent, and in this position here, he whipped out knight takes d5, I would be actually quite scared here to take on a8. I probably would take on a8 ultimately, because otherwise I'm just going to be worse in this position. But it's a really interesting idea to play queen takes and queen b6. And it seems like the path to an advantage for white is very narrow. So very interesting little idea there. Maybe something for you guys to try in your own games, for those of you who like to sort of bluff or semi-bluff your opponents a little bit.